The box office disaster of Megalopolis is more or less guaranteed. While now the dilemma is to determine whether the film is a presumptuous delirium or a hilarious misunderstood masterpiece, Megalopolis is also on its way to becoming a symbol. That of a type of cinema, one that is both a blockbuster and an auteur film whose days are numbered. One thing cannot be denied to Megalopolis. It is an unquestionably auteur film, not only in the creative sense, but also in the financial sense. Its $120 million budget comes out of the pocket of Francis Ford Coppola, who has mortgaged himself to pay for the production of this unquestionably personal work, since he had been thinking about it since the 80s. A task that is usually beyond the director's reach has also been paid for by Coppola. Lionsgate reached an agreement to distribute Megalopolis, but the distribution and marketing costs have also been paid for by the director, who had to assume them in a very advantageous deal for Lionsgate, accepted in desperation by the director when he saw that the film ran the risk of not finding a distributor. And in this, not finding a distributor is perhaps the reflection of the times in which we live, the lack of confidence in the commercial viability of the author. And that detail is the most important in this whole matter. We were talking a few months ago about how Coppola's difficulties in finding distribution for a film that should have guaranteed distribution only with the name of its director is not unusual today. Woody Allen is once again considering retirement. His is a case that goes beyond the commercial reception of his films, of course. Clint Eastwood ran the risk of having Warner break off its half-century relationship with him because CEO David Zaslav didn't like his decision to finance Cry Macho, a box office flop. Scorsese has canceled the shooting of his next two films. George Miller, after the failure of Furiosa, is once again suffering the same difficulties as almost his entire career. And let's not forget the more or less forced retirement of directors like John Carpenter, David Lynch, John Waters, or, until very recently and with nuances, David Cronenberg. They are directors, granted, less effective, quick, and profitable than the signers of current blockbusters and franchises. But until recently, those names were an essential piece of the machinery. They were the ones who gave it prestige and variety. Of their kind, only those who survive are those who have the financial independence to do what they want. James Cameron. Those who are on a run of box office success and have the approval of the industry. Christopher Nolan. And those who have a certain personal vision or a certain creative package, but have no choice but to enter the sequel and franchise machinery. Denis Villeneuve. We all remember Scorsese's words and his apparent disdain for superhero cinema, so generally misunderstood, in 2019. Now it is clear to what extent his words predicted a future like the current one.
Say a family wants to go to an amusement park. That's a good thing, you know? And at the amusement park, there's these cinematic expressions. They're new art form.
According to Scorsese, it's not cinema. I got to take a look at that, you know?
Why did he say that?
Because it's his opinion. And
but it is cinema, isn't it?
I mean, it plays in theaters.
Yeah, well, what did he mean by that it's not cinema?
I appreciate his opinion because I think it's like anything. We need all of the different perspectives.
The problem is not superhero movies, but a black and white industry, where only the blockbuster, the sequel, and the derivative and safe product have a place. Everything else is on the fringes of the industry, and that includes Coppola himself. But of course, how do you finance $120 million without a major behind you? We'd say we'll see how things develop, but something makes us think that Megalopolis could be the last film of its kind. Although the legacy of Megalopolis is still to be decided, things do not look good for the visionary filmmaker of The Godfather. The story of how the director has fought for decades for this self-financed film is already a well-known one. But in the 80s, and at the height of his career, Coppola risked even more. With carte blanche after the success of Apocalypse Now, his next film was a riskier venture than the previous ones, breaking away from the security offered by the big studios and turning his production company into a benchmark for independent cinema. His first project for this was One from the Heart. With a script written by Armin Bernstein, who came from MGM, the film was a simple, low-budget romantic drama that was initially intended to serve as a break from the hellish filming of his previous film, and as a proof of concept for the future of American zoetrope. There was talk of a studio that would become a haven for new creators, with large facilities that would incubate new projects, sets to shoot all kinds of stories, and restaurants and other amenities for actors and crew. It was an ambitious plan that was also conveyed in the first draft. Coppola wanted to surprise and innovate visually, with large sets that recreated entire streets of Las Vegas, special effects unusual in a romantic drama, and a musical component stimulated by the classics of the 50s. He ended up increasing the budget to $23 million, which was not at all easy to get at that time, and for a studio of that nature in its early days. To give you an idea of how much money this was for the kind of film it was, some of the most visually cutting-edge films of that year had been shot for much less. Raiders of the Lost Ark had cost $18 million. And Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, almost half that, $11 million. A few weeks into filming, investors withdrew $8 million. Against common sense and prudence, Coppola did not stop production, trusting that they would find the money along the way. The result was laid-off staff and favors. The studio had to close the narrative team, the rest agreed to take half their salaries, and Coppola had to accept help from Paramount by selling the rights to Interface, a studio project that they never got to film. But financial problems were not the only ones they suffered. The technology used for the special effects and the sets was pioneering, but also very complex to implement and expensive, causing delays in filming. The quest for creative control also caused some tension on the set and led to Coppola losing his choreographer, Gene Kelly. But the rest of the crew and cast remained loyal, hoping the director would work his magic in the end. The hard part was discovering that magic wasn't coming. When it was released in 1982, the film was torn apart by the media, which criticized its cliched story and pretentious visual style. Worse, it was an unmitigated box office failure like few the industry has ever seen. Of its $23 million budget, it grossed only about $700,000. To compare with other films of the same year, E.T. the Extraterrestrial made $11 million in its opening weekend against a $10 million budget, and went on to gross $300 million worldwide. But that was the highest grossing film of its year if you look at another, Cat People, which was considered a modest success, grossing $21 million internationally on its $12 million budget. This put an end to ambitious plans for the future of American zoetrope and returned Coppola to work with studios for more than a decade. Over the years, One from the Heart has vindicated itself, being considered a unique musical with an aesthetic ahead of its time. Although the filmmaker probably would have preferred those opinions decades earlier. Coppola has a long history of big-budget productions that failed at the box office. Megalopolis faces his legacy. There's no arguing with that. Francis Ford Coppola has made some of the best films in the history of cinema, and many of them have been smashing box office hits. The Godfather trilogy was extraordinarily profitable. It cost $7 million and grossed almost $300. Bram Stoker's Dracula was a difficult shoot, but ended up earning more than 5 times its budget. And Apocalypse Now. Well, that film almost took out most of its creators, so the fact that it didn't end up in the red is a miracle in itself. But that hasn't been the case for most of his career. Coppola's filmography is full of small and large stumbles that have made him an absolutely unpredictable director. At the moment, there is already talk of abysmal box office forecasts for Megalopolis. So this ambitious satirical epic with touches of science fiction could fall on the side of failures. But is this reputation fair? Does his career have so many failures? Let's review some of them. Coppola's career was marked from his first films by box office stumbles. The 80s were especially cruel to him, and after the successes of The Godfather or Apocalypse Now, he did not end up receiving popular acceptance. Some examples: The Outsiders. Although it has become a cult film over time, mainly because its entire cast ended up becoming stars. Note: Tom Cruise, Patrick Swayze, Thomas C. Howell, Rob Lowe, Emilio Estevez, Ralph Macchio, Matt Dillon, and Diane Lane. This film about youth gangs, knife fights, and teenage troubles did not connect with the public. With its $25 million in earnings out of $10 million in budget, it was certainly not a failure. But let us remember that Coppola had just revolutionized cinema and box office with the $100 million film Apocalypse Now, so it counts as a minor financial disappointment. Rumblefish, one of Coppola's most unanimously praised films, on par with his great classics. But unlike them, and despite being based on a best-selling film for young people, it did not do well at the box office. The plot focuses on the relationship between two brothers, very young Mickey Rourke and Matt Dillon, and their conflictive relationship with the youth gangs of the time. Visually captivating, with elements reminiscent of German Expressionism and the French New Wave, it only grossed about $2.5 million of the $10 million it had budgeted. Gardens of Stone. Recovering the great James Caan of The Godfather, Coppola signed this conventional military drama about the mature years of a sergeant who is not satisfied with his professional destiny after fighting in Vietnam and Korea. The war theme, even coming from Coppola, was no guarantee of anything, since it did not even gross half of the $13 million it cost. Stories of New York, an episodic film directed with Woody Allen and Martin Scorsese that told stories set in the cinematic city of skyscrapers. The Scorsese episode was unanimously praised, but it didn't connect either. It only recouped $10 million of its $15 million budget. He then took a long break, and for the past few decades, Coppola has remained on the fringes of the industry, self-producing very modest films on extremely low budgets. Even that hasn't stopped them from failing at the box office, usually due to distribution problems, and an almost unattractive, almost amateurish look. Among them are Tetro. A teenager runs away from his father and gets a job on a ship. When he arrives in Argentina, he decides to look for his brother, who also left home in pursuit of his dream of being a playwright. But the man he finds is different from the one he remembered. Thanks to Vincent Gallo's performance, the film was well received, but it failed at the box office, since it only recouped half of its already meager $5 million budget. Twixt, a vampire delirium starring Val Kilmer and Elle Fanning, in which a writer has bizarre hallucinations after seeing the corpse of a man who died under strange circumstances. Based, according to Coppola himself, on a nightmare, it cost just $7 million. However, it only grossed $647,839. One thing must be admitted, and that is that Francis Ford Coppola has never lacked revolutionary spirit. His cinema, brimming with ideas and ambition, also produces films that have not connected with the public, and which now faces, perhaps, the most ambitious test of his career. We will soon know if Megalopolis, a project that Coppola has been cherishing since the 80s, ends up going down in history as one more in the long list of box office failures of the director, or even as the most outstanding of all. If you like the content, you can support me with your like and subscription. See you in the next video.